Jake Morrison stared at the message on his screen for the third time. The words hadn't changed, but he kept hoping they would. The official seal of the Galactic Coalition glowed at the top, followed by cold, formal text that made his stomach twist. Ambassador Morrison, you and your delegation are required to appear before the full Galactic Council in 7 days. This is not a request. Transport will be provided, that was it. No explanation, no reason given, just a command. Jake had been Earth's ambassador to the Coalition for 8 years, and he had never seen anything like this. Lisa Carter walked into his office without knocking. She was his chief military advisor, a woman who had fought in 3 different wars before humanity even knew aliens existed. Her gray hair was pulled back tight and her dark eyes were serious. You got the message too? She asked. Jake nodded. What do you think it means? Lisa sat down across from his desk. Nothing good. I've been talking to my contacts in Coalition security. Word is that several species have been pushing for a review of humanity's membership status. A review. Jake felt his heart sink. What kind of review? Before Lisa could answer, Ben Hughes burst through the door. The science director was young for his position, barely 35, with messy brown hair and excited eyes. But today he looked worried. Jake, have you seen the news feeds from the other species? Ben held up his tablet. The Zephyrians are calling us evolutionary dead ends. The Karathi say we're too violent to be trusted with space travel. Jake rubbed his temples. This was getting worse by the minute. Sit down, Ben. We need to talk about this. The 3 humans sat in Jake's small office aboard the space station that orbited Earth. Through the window, they could see their home planet turning slowly below them, blue and green and beautiful, just like it had been for millions of years. How long has this been building? Jake asked. Lisa pulled out her own tablet. At least 6 months. Maybe longer. It started with small complaints. We were too emotional in trade negotiations. Our colonists were causing problems with local wildlife on new planets. Our ships were too loud, too messy, too human. Ben leaned forward. It's not just that. They think we're stupid. At the last science conference, a Vorthan researcher called human technology crude copies of superior designs. Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but he pushed it down. Getting angry wouldn't help anyone right now. What exactly are they saying about us? That we don't belong, Lisa said quietly. That we're too primitive, too short-lived, too unpredictable. Some of them think we should never have been allowed off Earth in the first place. Jake stood up and walked to the window. Earth looked so peaceful from here. It was hard to believe that down there, 5 billion humans were living their lives completely unaware that their future in space might be ending. We've been good members of the Coalition, he said. We've followed the rules, paid our dues, contributed what we could. That's part of the problem, Ben said. We've been junior partners for 30 years. We do the jobs nobody else wants. We mine asteroids, clean up space junk, provide basic labor. They don't see us as equals. Lisa nodded. And now they're questioning whether we ever can be equals. Jake turned back to face them. All right. We have 7 days to get to Concord Prime. That gives us time to prepare. Ben, I want you to put together a list of every human achievement in the last 30 years. Every innovation, every discovery, every contribution we've made. Already working on it, Ben said. Lisa, I need you to review our military record. Every time human forces helped in coalition conflicts, every rescue mission, every peacekeeping operation. Done, Lisa said. Jake sat back down. And I need to figure out how to convince 43 different alien species that humanity deserves to exist in space. The next few days passed quickly. Jake barely slept, spending his time reading reports and trying to understand what had gone wrong. The Coalition had always been distant with humanity, but this felt different. This felt final. The transport ship that came for them was not what Jake expected. Instead of a sleek Coalition vessel, they sent an old cargo hauler. The alien crew barely spoke to them, and their quarters were cramped and cold. They're not even pretending to respect us anymore, Lisa muttered as they settled in for the 3-day journey to Concord Prime. Ben was studying his tablet, going over his research. Jake, I've been thinking, what if this isn't really about our achievements? What if it's about something else? Like what? Fear, Ben said quietly. We're the newest species in the Coalition, but we're also the fastest growing. Our population is expanding, our technology is improving, our colonies are thriving. What if they're not worried about us being too primitive? What if they're worried about us becoming too advanced? Jake considered this. It made sense in a way. Humanity had come from nothing to space travel in less than a century. Most other species had taken thousands of years to reach the same level. You think they see us as a threat? I think they see us as unpredictable, Lisa said. And in their ordered, stable universe, unpredictable equals dangerous. As their ship approached Concord Prime, Jake got his first good look at the massive space station. It was the size of a small moon, home to millions of beings from dozens of worlds, the center of galactic civilization, and possibly the place where humanity's dreams would die. The docking process was cold and efficient. No fanfare, no welcome ceremony, just a brief message directing them to quarters in Section 7, Level 12. Jake knew the station well enough to realize they were being housed in the cheapest, most basic area available. Their rooms were small and sterile, with barely enough space for their belongings. Through the tiny window, Jake could see the grand plaza where diplomats from important species stayed. The difference was clear. They're not even trying to hide their contempt, Lisa said, dropping her bag on the narrow bed. Ben was at his window, watching alien beings walk through the corridors below. Look at them, he said. So sure of themselves. So confident that they know better than us. Jake joined him at the window. Tall Zephyrians glided past like walking crystals. Insectoid Karathi skittered along the walls. Gaseous Vorthan floated in special containment suits, all of them ancient, all of them established, all of them looking down on the newest members of their club. Tomorrow we find out what this is really about, Jake said. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he stood at his window and thought about Earth, turning far away in space. He thought about the colonies humanity had built, the lives they had made among the stars. He thought about the children being born on distant worlds who might never see space again if tomorrow went badly. Most of all, he thought about dignity. Win or lose, humanity would face whatever came with their heads held high. The morning alarm came too soon, and with it, the beginning of the end. The Grand Assembly Hall was bigger than Jake had imagined. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, and curved walls held thousands of seats arranged in perfect circles. Representatives from 43 different species filled the space, creating a rainbow of colors, shapes, and sizes that would have been beautiful if the situation weren't so serious. Jake walked down the center aisle with Lisa and Ben behind him. Every step echoed in the vast space. He could feel hundreds of eyes watching them, studying them, judging them. Some of the aliens whispered to each other as the humans passed. Others simply stared. Their seats were in the front row, directly facing the raised platform where the council leaders sat. Jake recognized High Counselor Vexithara immediately. The Zephyrian was 12 feet tall, her crystalline body refracting the chamber's lights into rainbow patterns. When she moved, she made a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. To her right sat Counselor Clithak of the Karathi. His insect-like body was covered in dark green chitin, and his forearms moved constantly as he sorted through documents. His large compound eyes reflected the light like black mirrors. On Vexthara's left floated Counselor Motharis of the Vorthan. The gaseous being was contained in a transparent suit that showed the swirling clouds of his body. Different colors pulsed through the gas like emotions made visible. The council recognizes the delegation from Earth, Vexthara said. Her voice was like crystal singing, beautiful but cold. You stand before us today to answer serious questions about humanity's place in the Galactic Coalition. Jake stood up. High Counselor, we are honored to appear before the Council. Humanity has always been committed to the principles and goals of the Coalition. That commitment is precisely what we question, Clithak said. His voice was sharp and clicking like insects crawling over metal. For 30 years, humanity has been a member of this coalition. In that time, you have contributed little and caused much disruption. Ben started to stand, but Jake put a hand on his shoulder. Not yet. Vexthara raised one crystalline arm. The Council has prepared evidence of humanity's failures. Prosecutor Clithak will present the case. Clithak moved to the center of the platform. His forearms gestured, and holographic displays appeared in the air above him. Images of Earth began to play, showing cities and forests and oceans. Observe the human homeworld, he said, a planet ravaged by war, pollution, and destruction. In the short time since humans developed technology, they have poisoned their own air and water, driven countless species to extinction, and waged constant warfare against their own kind. The images changed, showing scenes of human conflict. Battles, explosions, destroyed cities. Jake watched his own species' history being used against them and felt sick. This violence, Clithak continued, is not a thing of the past. Human colonies continue to experience conflict. Their military forces are involved in more disputes than any other coalition member. They are by nature a warlike species. Lisa's hand moved toward her side, where her ceremonial weapon hung. Jake caught her wrist and shook his head slightly. She pulled her hand back, but her jaw was tight with anger. The prosecutor moved to his next point. Furthermore, humans are evolutionarily stunted. Observe their lifespans. Numbers appeared in the air. Humans live an average of 90 standard years. Zephyrians live 800. Karathi live 1500. Vorthan are essentially immortal. How can such short-lived beings contribute meaningfully to long-term galactic stability? Ben couldn't stay quiet anymore. Our short lives make us more focused, more driven to achieve. Silence, Vexthera said. The human delegation will have opportunity to respond when the prosecution is complete. Clithak gestured again, and new images appeared. Human technology ships weapons tools. Finally, examine human innovation. Every significant technology they possess is a crude modification of designs provided by other coalition species. They are not inventors but imitators, not creators but copiers. The images showed human ships next to alien designs, human computers compared to alien systems, human weapons alongside alien models. In every case, the human technology looked simpler, rougher, less elegant. The evidence is clear, Clithak said. Humanity is a violent, short-lived species with limited creative capacity. They have contributed nothing unique to the coalition and have caused numerous problems through their emotional, irrational decision-making. Motheris pulsed with what Jake recognized as agreement. Yellow clouds swirled through the Vorthan's containment suit. The question before us is simple, the gas being said. Does humanity serve the greater good of the coalition, or do they threaten it? Another council member spoke up. Jake didn't recognize the species, but the alien was tall and thin with silver skin. Perhaps the humans would be happier returning to their homeworld. They could live out their brief lives in peace, without the stress of trying to function in a civilization beyond their understanding. Laughter rippled through some sections of the assembly. Not all the aliens were laughing, but enough to make Jake's stomach turn. They weren't just being judged. They were being mocked. Vexthera raised her arm for silence. The prosecution has presented its case. We will now hear humanity's defense. Jake stood up. Around him, hundreds of alien beings waited to hear what he would say. Some looked curious, others bored. Still others openly hostile. He thought about his notes, his prepared arguments, his carefully researched points, then he threw it all away. High Counselor, I request a full day to prepare our response to these charges. Vexthera's crystalline head tilted slightly. Very well. The council will reconvene tomorrow at this time. The human delegation will present their defense then. As the session ended and aliens began filing out of the chamber, Jake heard more whispers and comments. Poor creatures, said a voice Jake thought belonged to a Nexari. They don't understand how outmatched they are. This is almost cruel, said another. Like watching children try to debate with adults. Lisa was shaking with anger as they walked back to their quarters. Did you hear them? Did you hear how they talked about us? I heard, Jake said quietly. Ben was devastated. All my research, all the evidence I prepared about our achievements, none of it mattered. They've already decided we don't belong here. They reached their quarters in silence. Jake went to his small room and sat on the bed, staring at the wall. Everything he had prepared to say seemed pointless now. How could he argue with their evidence? Humans were violent. Humans did have short lives. Human technology was simpler than alien designs. But as he sat there, Jake began to think about something else. He thought about the human colonies he had visited, the people he had met, the stories he had heard. He thought about what made humanity special, and it wasn't anything that would show up in statistics or technology comparisons. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Lisa and Ben came in, both looking worried. Jake, what are we going to do? Ben asked. Jake looked at his two companions. Lisa, the warrior who had spent her life protecting others. Ben, the scientist who had dedicated himself to understanding the universe. Both of them good people, the best humanity had to offer. We're going to tell them who we really are, Jake said. What do you mean? Lisa asked. Jake stood up and walked to his small window. Outside, alien beings moved through the corridors of Concord Prime, going about their ancient, orderly lives. "They think they know us," he said. "They've looked at our wars and our technology and our lifespans, and they think that tells them everything. But they're wrong." He turned back to face his friends. "Tomorrow I'm not going to argue with their facts. I'm going to tell them about our truth." Ben looked confused. "What truth?" Jake smiled for the first time since they had arrived at Concord Prime. "The truth about what it means to be human." Jake spent the night walking through the corridors of Concord Prime. He couldn't sleep, so he wandered the station's public areas, watching alien beings go about their lives. Everything was orderly, efficient, predictable. The Zephyrians moved with crystalline precision. The Karathi followed exact patterns. The Vorthon flowed in mathematical curves. It was beautiful in its way, but it was also cold. When morning came, Lisa and Ben found him in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. "You never came back to your quarters," Lisa said. "We were worried." Jake turned to face them. His eyes were tired but clear. "I know what I'm going to say today." Ben sat down beside him. "What did you decide?" "I'm not going to use any of our research," Jake said. "No charts, no statistics, no lists of achievements." Lisa frowned. "Then how are you going to defend us?" "By telling them stories." Ben and Lisa exchanged glances. "Stories?" Ben asked. Jake nodded. "They think they know what humanity is based on data and observations. But data doesn't tell you who someone really is. Stories do." An hour later, they were back in the Grand Assembly Hall. The same hundreds of alien beings filled the curved seats. The same council members sat on their raised platform. But something felt different today. The air seemed heavier, more tense. Vexithara's crystalline voice rang out across the chamber. "The council recognizes Ambassador Morrison." "Present humanity's defense," Jake stood up. He walked to the center of the space, the same spot where Klithik had presented his accusations the day before. But Jake carried no holographic displays, no prepared documents, no technological aids. He had only his voice and his words. "High Counselor, honored members of the council," he began. "Yesterday you heard evidence about humanity's failures. Our wars, our short lives, our simple technology. All of that evidence was accurate." A murmur went through the assembly. This wasn't what they had expected. "We are a violent species," Jake continued. "We do fight wars. We do have conflicts. But let me tell you about Captain Emma Walsh." Jake's voice grew stronger as he found his rhythm. Emma was commanding a supply run to the Kepler system 3 years ago. Her ship detected a distress signal from a Karathi research vessel that was caught in a solar flare. The radiation levels were deadly. Her crew told her it was suicide to attempt a rescue. He paused, looking around the chamber. Many of the aliens were listening intently now. Emma knew that the Karathi Research Council had refused to trade with humans the year before. They had called us inferior beings and said our technology was too primitive to be useful. She had every reason to ignore that distress call. Jake saw Klithak shift uncomfortably on the platform, but Emma didn't ignore it. She flew her ship directly into the solar flare, rescued all 14 Karathi researchers, and died from radiation poisoning 2 days later. Her last words were, "I hope their research saves lives." The chamber was completely quiet now. "You say we're violent, and you're right. But we're violent in defense of others. We fight when fighting needs to be done, and we protect those who cannot protect themselves, even those who hate us." Jake moved to his next story. "You mock our short lives. Let me tell you about the colony on New Haven. When Zephyrian refugees arrived there after the plasma storms destroyed their mining station, the human colonists had barely enough food for themselves. Winter was coming and supply ships wouldn't arrive for 6 months. He looked directly at Vexithara. The colony council voted unanimously to share their food stores with the refugees. They knew it meant shorter rations for everyone, including their children. They knew some of them might not survive the winter. Jake's voice grew softer. When the supply ships finally arrived, they found humans and Zephyrians working together, sharing resources, taking care of each other's young. 17 humans had died from malnutrition, but not a single Zephyrian refugee was lost. Vexithara's crystalline form seemed to dim slightly. "You call our lives short," Jake continued, "but we pack more growth, more change, more hope into those brief years than most species experience in millennia. A human child can grow from helpless infant to wise adult in just 20 years. We adapt, we learn, we become better than we were. Ben was watching from the front row, tears in his eyes. Lisa sat straight and proud. Jake turned to address the entire assembly. You criticize our technology for being simple, crude, copied from your designs. That's also true. But let me ask you something. When was the last time any of your species invented something truly new? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The Zephyrians have used the same crystalline matrix technology for 3,000 years. The Karathi haven't changed their hive ship designs in 2 millennia. The Vorthan have been using the same energy containment system since before humans learned to make fire. Jake's voice grew passionate. We copy your technology because we're still learning, but we improve it. We adapt it, we make it do things you never imagined. That crude human drive system you mock? It's 15% more efficient than the original Karathi design. Our simple communication arrays have twice the range of standard Zephyrian equipment. He paused, looking around the chamber. You've stopped growing. You've become comfortable, stable, unchanging. But growth requires risk. Change requires mistakes. Progress requires the willingness to fail. Jake took a step closer to the council platform. You judge us for our emotional decision-making. You think logic without feeling makes you superior. But logic without compassion is just sophisticated brutality. Motheris pulsed with agitation, yellow and red clouds swirling through his containment suit. A purely logical species would have left those Karathi researchers to die in the solar flare, Jake said. Logic said it was too dangerous, too costly, too risky. But Emma Walsh didn't make a logical decision. She made a human decision. Jake's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but in the perfect acoustics of the chamber, everyone could hear him clearly. You want to know what makes humanity special? It's not our technology or our lifespans or our military might. It's that we still remember how to care about each other. We still remember how to grow. We still remember how to hope. He straightened up, looking each council member in the eye. You've built a perfect, orderly, stable civilization, and it's dying. When was the last time any coalition species expanded beyond their current borders? When was the last time you built something new instead of just maintaining something old? When was the last time you took a risk for someone else's benefit? The chamber was completely silent. Hundreds of alien beings sat frozen, listening to a human tell them truths they didn't want to hear. We don't fit into your perfect order because we're still alive, Jake said. We still change, still grow, still dream of something better. And that terrifies you. He looked around the assembly one more time. You say we don't belong here. You're probably right. We don't belong in a museum of dead civilizations. We belong among the living. Jake walked back to his seat and sat down. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Finally, Vexithara spoke. The council will now deliberate on humanity's fate. We will reconvene in 2 hours with our decision. As the aliens filed out of the chamber, Jake noticed something he hadn't seen before. Some of them were looking at the humans differently now, not with contempt or amusement, but with something that might have been uncertainty. Lisa leaned over to whisper in his ear. Whatever happens next, I'm proud to be human. Ben nodded agreement. That was the most honest thing I've ever heard anyone say in this place. Jake watched the last of the aliens leave the chamber. In 2 hours, they would learn humanity's fate. But for the first time since arriving at Concord Prime, he felt like they had spoken their truth. Now they would see if anyone had been listening. The 2 hours passed slowly. Jake, Lisa, and Ben waited in their quarters, not talking much. There wasn't much to say. They had done everything they could. Now their fate was in the hands of beings who had already shown what they thought of humanity. When the call came to return to the assembly hall, Jake felt strangely calm. He had spoken his truth. Whatever happened next, he could live with it. The chamber felt different when they entered. The alien delegates seemed more subdued, less confident than before. There was tension in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. High Counselor Vexithara stood as they took their seats. Her crystalline form caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the walls, but the usual beauty of it seemed cold and distant. The council has reached its decision, she announced. Her voice rang through the chamber like a bell tolling. We have considered the evidence presented by both sides. We have weighed humanity's contributions against their complications. Jake felt his heart starting to beat faster. By a vote of 38-5, Vexithara continued, the council finds that humanity is incompatible with coalition membership. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. 38-5. It wasn't even close. The specific finding, Clithack said, rising from his seat, is that humanity's unpredictable nature and emotional decision-making pose an unacceptable risk to the ordered stability that the Coalition has maintained. For 3,000 years, Lisa's hands clenched into fists. Ben stared at the floor. Vexithera gestured, and new holographic displays appeared in the air. Humanity will surrender all off-world colonies and installations within 1 standard year. All humans currently residing in Coalition space will return to Earth within the same time frame. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. Not just expulsion from the Coalition, exile to their home planet. Any humans found in space after the deadline, Mattharis added, his gaseous form pulsing with satisfaction, will be processed according to Coalition law regarding unauthorized aliens. Processing. Jake knew what that meant. Imprisonment, possibly worse. Furthermore, Vexithera said, Earth's star system will be placed under Coalition monitoring to ensure compliance with this ruling. Jake stood up slowly. The chamber was completely quiet, hundreds of alien beings watching to see how the humans would react to their doom. But before Jake could speak, laughter broke the silence. It started with the Karathi delegation. Clithack's chest plates clicked together in the insectoid equivalent of amusement. The sound spread to other Karathi in the chamber, a chittering, scratching noise that made Jake's skin crawl. Then the Vorthan joined in. Mattharis pulsed with bright yellow clouds, and other gas beings throughout the chamber began to pulse in rhythm. Their laughter was like wind through hollow tubes, eerie and cold. More species joined the laughter. The silver-skinned beings Jake didn't recognize made high, piercing sounds. A delegation of what looked like walking plants rustled their leaves in amusement. Even some of the Zephyrians began to chime softly, their crystalline bodies creating musical notes of mockery. Perhaps now, Clithack said over the laughter, the humans will understand their proper place in the cosmic order. A Stellari counselor Jake hadn't noticed before spoke up, her voice like singing crystal. We should have known better than to expect a species that still experiences love to understand rational governance. The laughter grew louder. It echoed off the chamber walls, bouncing back and forth until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Hundreds of alien beings laughing at humanity's downfall, laughing at their exile, laughing at their naive hope that they could ever belong among the stars. Jake felt Lisa tense beside him. Her hand moved toward her weapon, and for a moment he thought she might actually draw it. But she didn't. She just sat there, shaking with rage and humiliation. Ben had his head in his hands. His shoulders shook, and Jake realized the young scientist was crying. The laughter continued for what felt like forever. Jake stood there in the center of it, feeling the mockery wash over him like poison. This was how it ended. Not with dignity, not with respect, but with the laughter of beings who thought humanity was nothing more than a bad joke. But as the laughter went on, something strange happened. Jake stopped feeling humiliated. Instead, he felt sorry for them. These ancient, powerful, supposedly superior beings were laughing at a species that had offered them friendship, sacrifice, and hope. They were mocking the very qualities that made life worth living. They had become so concerned with order and stability that they had forgotten what it meant to be alive. The laughter began to die down as the aliens realized Jake wasn't reacting the way they expected. He wasn't crying or begging or shouting. He was just standing there watching them with steady, calm eyes. Vexithera called for order. Silence in the chamber. The ruling has been delivered. The last echoes of laughter faded away, leaving an uncomfortable quiet. Ambassador Morrison, the High Counselor said, "Do you wish to make any final statement before this session concludes?" Jake looked around the chamber one more time. At the Karathi, still clicking softly with amusement. At the Vorthan, still pulsing with satisfied colors. At the Zephyrians, their crystalline forms cold and distant. At all the other species who had sat in judgment of humanity and found them wanting. He thought about Emma Walsh, dying from radiation poisoning after saving people who had called her inferior. He thought about the human colonists who had shared their food with Zephyrian refugees. He thought about all the humans throughout the galaxy who would have to abandon their homes, their dreams, their new lives among the stars. And he thought about dignity. Jake raised his hand. The chamber fell silent, waiting for his response. Every alien being in the hall expected him to beg, to plead, to offer desperate bargains for humanity's survival in space. Instead, Jake's voice was calm and steady when he spoke. "You know what the difference is between you and us," he said. "We've learned that the only response to mockery from those who've forgotten their own struggles is dignity." He turned to Lisa and Ben. "We're leaving." Lisa and Ben stood up immediately. No protests, no arguments, no last-minute appeals. They simply gathered their few belongings and prepared to walk away. The laughter died completely. The aliens in the chamber suddenly realized that something unexpected was happening. The humans weren't broken. They weren't defeated. They were choosing to leave with their heads held high. Jake looked back at the council platform one last time. "When you remember how to grow instead of just endure," he said quietly, "Earth will still be there." Then he turned his back on the Galactic Coalition and walked toward the chamber doors. Lisa and Ben followed him. Their footsteps echoed in the suddenly silent hall. 3 humans walking away from the judgment of the galaxy. Behind them, the silence stretched on and on. Some of the alien delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few looked at each other with uncertainty. This wasn't how condemnations usually ended. As the humans reached the chamber doors, Jake heard movement behind them. He didn't turn around to look, but he knew that some of the aliens were standing up. The ones who had voted against the expulsion, maybe. The ones who still remembered what it meant to respect courage. The doors opened and Jake stepped through. Lisa and Ben followed, and the doors closed behind them with a soft hiss. They walked through the corridors of Concord Prime in silence, leaving behind the center of galactic civilization and the species who no longer deserved to call themselves civilized. The corridors of Concord Prime had never seemed so long. Jake walked steadily forward, his footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Behind him, Lisa and Ben followed in silence. None of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. As they moved through the station, Jake began to notice other humans. A maintenance worker repairing a wall panel looked up as they passed. A young technician carrying a toolkit stopped and stared. A janitor pushing a cleaning cart paused in his work. The word spread without anyone saying anything. Jake could see it in their faces, the way their expressions changed from curiosity to understanding to grim acceptance. The maintenance worker put down his tools. The technician set aside her kit. The janitor abandoned his cart. They began to follow. By the time Jake reached the main transit hub, there were 20 humans walking behind him. By the time he reached the residential quarters, there were 50. No one asked what had happened. No one needed to. They could read the story in the silent procession of their leaders. Jake passed the security station where Commander Frank Barnes was on duty. Frank was a big man with graying hair who had served on Concord Prime for 15 years. When he saw Jake approaching, he stood up from his desk. "Sir?" Frank asked quietly. Jake stopped and looked at the security chief. "Pack your things, Frank. We're going home." Frank nodded once, then began removing his coalition security badge. He set it on his desk and walked around to join the growing crowd of humans. They moved through the commercial district next. Human-owned shops and restaurants lined the walkways. Small businesses that had served the diverse population of Concord Prime for decades. Jake saw Maria Santos closing up her coffee shop early, her hands shaking as she turned the sign to "closed" for the last time. She grabbed a small bag from behind the counter and stepped into the corridor. Tom Bradley was packing up his repair shop, his tools disappearing into cases with practiced efficiency. Sarah Kim shut down her translation service and gathered her few personal items. One by one, the humans of Concord Prime were joining the exodus. The aliens they passed stared in confusion. This wasn't how these things usually went. When a species was expelled from the coalition, there were negotiations, appeals, desperate bargaining. There were angry protests and tearful pleas. There was never this quiet, dignified withdrawal. Jake led the growing procession toward the docking bays. The crowd behind him had swelled to over 200 now. Families with children, elderly humans who had spent their entire careers in coalition space, young people who had never even seen Earth. All of them walking in silence toward an uncertain future. At the administrative center, Jake saw Dr. Patricia Wells, the head of Human Medical Services, on the station. She was packing patient files into storage containers, her face tight with controlled emotion. When she saw the procession, she sealed the last container and joined them. 30 years of medical records, she said quietly to Jake. Treatments that saved alien lives, procedures that helped coalition species. All of it going into storage because we're not civilized enough for their tastes. Jake nodded but said nothing. There would be time for anger later. Right now there was only the journey home. The procession reached the main promenade, the heart of Concord Prime's social life. Humans and aliens mingled here daily, sharing meals and conversation, conducting business and building relationships. But today the aliens stood aside and watched as humanity walked past. Some of the watchers looked uncomfortable. A group of Nixari diplomats whispered among themselves, their blue-scaled faces showing obvious distress. A few individual aliens from various species looked like they wanted to say something, but none of them stepped forward. Jake understood. Speaking up now would mean defying the coalition's decision, and that carried risks. It was easier to watch in silence and let someone else make the hard choices. The docking bays were vast caverns of metal and glass where ships from across the galaxy came to trade and refuel. Jake led his people toward Bay 47, where the human transport vessels were berthed. These were working ships, not the elegant craft favored by other species. Functional, reliable, built for carrying people and cargo across the void. Captain Lisa Grant was waiting by her ship, the cargo hauler New Frontier. She was a veteran spacer with short gray hair and calloused hands. When she saw Jake approaching with hundreds of humans behind him, she nodded grimly. "I heard what happened in the council chamber," she said. "How many do we need to transport?" Jake looked back at the crowd that had followed him. The number had grown to nearly 300 now, and more were still arriving from distant parts of the station. "All of them," he said. Lisa Grant smiled for the first time that day. "Then we'll make room." The loading began immediately. Humans who had lived on Concord Prime for decades carried their entire lives in small bags and cases. Children who had grown up among aliens asked quiet questions about the planet they had never seen. Elderly people who had watched humanity's rise among the stars prepared for their final journey home. Jake stood at the boarding ramp of the New Frontier, watching his people file past. Each face told a story. Dreams abandoned, careers ended, lives uprooted because a collection of ancient aliens had decided humanity didn't belong among the stars. But what struck Jake most was the absence of bitterness in those faces. There was sadness, yes, and disappointment. But there was also something else. Pride, dignity, the quiet strength of people who knew who they were and what they stood for. Ben Hughes appeared at Jake's side, carrying a single bag with his personal belongings. "I keep thinking about all the research we'll never finish," he said. "All the discoveries we might have made if they'd given us more time." "We'll make new discoveries," Jake said. "Back home or wherever we end up. That's what humans do." Lisa Carter was the last to board. She had insisted on doing a final sweep of the human quarters, making sure no one was left behind. As she approached the ship, Jake saw that she was carrying something in her hand. "What's that?" he asked. Lisa held up a small flag, the blue and white banner of the United Earth Coalition, humanity's government. "I took it from the embassy office," she said. "Seemed wrong to leave it behind." She handed the flag to Jake. "You should carry this." Jake looked at the simple piece of cloth. It represented everything humanity had achieved in space, all their hopes and dreams and sacrifices. In a few hours, it would be the only piece of human civilization left among the stars. "No," he said, handing it back. "We'll carry it together." The ship's engines began to warm up with a low, rumbling sound. Similar sounds echoed from the other human vessels in the bay as their crews prepared for departure. Within an hour, every human on Concord Prime would be gone. Jake took one last look around the docking bay. A few aliens had gathered to watch the departure, but they kept their distance. None of them came forward to say goodbye or to wish the humans well. They simply watched in silence as an entire species walked away from the stars. The boarding ramp began to close. Jake, Lisa, and Ben stepped inside the ship and made their way to the passenger compartment. It was crowded with humans of all ages, all backgrounds, all bound together by their shared exile. Through the small viewport, Jake watched as Concord Prime fell away behind them. The massive station grew smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light among the stars. Captain Grant's voice came over the intercom. "Course laid in for Earth. Travel time 6 days. Welcome aboard the last human ship to leave Coalition space." Jake closed his eyes and tried to imagine what Earth would be like. He had been born on a colony world and had never seen humanity's birthplace. Now it would be his home, and the home of every human in the galaxy. The ship settled into its long journey, and Jake finally allowed himself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. They had lost their place among the stars, lost their colonies, lost their dreams of a galactic future, but they had kept their dignity. As Jake drifted off to sleep in his uncomfortable seat, he thought about the children aboard the ship. They would grow up on Earth under blue skies and white clouds. They would learn about the time when humans had walked among aliens and dreamed of infinite possibilities. And maybe, someday, they would return to the stars, not as junior partners or tolerated guests, but as equals, as humans who had learned from their exile and grown stronger because of it. The ship flew on through the darkness, carrying its cargo of dreamers home. Behind them, Concord Prime continued its ancient orbit, home to species that had forgotten how to grow, how to change, how to hope for something better than what they had. The Galactic Coalition had made its choice. They had chosen order over growth, stability over possibility, fear over hope. Humanity had made their choice too. They had chosen to leave with dignity rather than stay without respect. Time would tell which choice was wiser. But as the last human ship left Coalition space, carrying 300 souls toward an uncertain future, Jake Morrison smiled in his sleep. They were going home.